He was only 3 years old. One moment, little Jared Atadero was hiking a peaceful trail in the Colorado mountains with a group of trusted adults. The next, he was simply gone. No screams, no footprints, no struggle. Just gone. What followed was one of the most haunting and perplexing disappearances in wilderness history. And the deeper you look into what happened, the more unsettling it becomes. This isn't just a story of a child wandering off. It's a story filled with silence, secrecy, and clues that don't make sense. This is the chilling case of Jared Atadero. Stay with me, because by the end, you may find yourself questioning everything you thought you knew about what the forest can hide. It was supposed to be a simple, happy outing, the kind of spontaneous trip you take to celebrate family, friendship, and freedom in the heart of the wilderness. That October morning in 1999, Alan Atadero watched his 3-year-old son Jared bounce with excitement. The boy had always been full of energy, curious, fearless, with a smile so wide it almost made you forget how fragile he still was. To everyone who knew him, Jared seemed like a child who'd never sit still, who wanted to take on the world with little legs that never tired and eyes that never blinked at danger. Alan owned a small lodge tucked away near Colorado's Poudre River. He ran it quietly, with the help of his 2 children, Jared and his 6-year-old sister Jocelyn. It was the kind of place where you woke up to the sound of pine needles brushing against the window and the smell of campfire smoke lingering on flannel. That weekend, a Christian singles group had been staying at the lodge. They weren't strangers. They were friends of the family, trusted people who came often. When they offered to take both kids on a hike that morning, Alan hesitated. He knew the trail, he knew the mountains, and he knew his boy. But the kids wanted to go. Jocelyn begged. Jared tugged on his pant leg with pleading eyes and a big goofy grin. They promised it would be a short hike. They promised he'd be safe. So Alan agreed. The group set off toward the Big South Trail, a picturesque path that runs along the Cache la Poudre River and climbs into the Roosevelt National Forest. It's a trail both gentle and wild, beautiful, but remote. At the time, cell phone coverage was non-existent. It was the kind of place where things could go wrong without warning, and no one would know for hours. What no one knew then was that within that same forest, a silence was already waiting. A silence that would take hold of a family and never let go. Sometime during the hike, about 2 miles into the trail, Jared grew restless. He was walking with the group, 12 adults, Jocelyn and him, but in the way that only a bold 3-year-old can, he darted ahead. Some say he was chasing a butterfly. Others said he wanted to be the leader. Either way, no one stopped him. And just like that, he was gone. 2 fishermen near the trail reported seeing him shortly after. They described a cheerful little boy who stopped to chat, asking whether there were any bears nearby. They chuckled and pointed out that he should probably be with his group. That was the last confirmed sighting of Jared Atadero. The rest of the group assumed he had just gone around a bend, that he was still ahead, playing in the brush or throwing stones into the river. But minutes stretched into an hour, and an hour into panic. When they finally realized he wasn't just hiding or exploring, it was too late. The forest had taken him. The group rushed back to the trailhead and contacted Alan. He drove there immediately, heart pounding with confusion and fear. He expected to find his son throwing rocks in the creek, maybe hiding behind a tree, giggling. But when he arrived, there was only the stillness of pine and the thundering quiet of something terribly wrong. He asked where Jared had been last seen. They couldn't say exactly. He asked who had been watching him. No one could answer clearly. A simple hike, a safe group. And yet, no one knew. The search began before nightfall. Local authorities arrived with dogs, heat sensors, helicopters, and teams of volunteers. They combed the trail from every angle, shouting Jared's name into the wind, hoping for the telltale giggle of a hiding child. But there was nothing. Not a footprint. Not a scrap of clothing. Not even the snap of a twig in the wrong direction. And as darkness crept into the forest, an icy truth began to settle over everyone. This wasn't just a case of a little boy who got turned around. Something else had happened. In the days that followed, the search turned into one of the largest manhunts in Colorado history. Helicopters scanned the ridgelines. Dive teams searched the river. Volunteers beat through thickets and climbed loose shale cliffs with nothing but hope. But hope couldn't find him. Dogs picked up a scent that vanished halfway up the trail. Rangers looked for animal tracks but found none conclusive. A mountain lion was considered, but there were no signs of a struggle. No blood, no fur, no torn clothing. The theory didn't quite fit, but it was all they had. Days turned into weeks. In one tragic turn, a search and rescue helicopter crashed while scouring the area, injuring several people on board. It was a painful reminder that the search itself carried its own danger, and yet they continued. No one wanted to believe that a child could simply disappear. But he had. Alan never gave up. He worked with psychics, survivalists, private investigators, anyone who might offer a new angle. He gave interviews. He created missing person posters. He placed signs at the trailhead begging hikers to report anything out of place. Time dragged forward. Winter came and went. The trail iced over. Then spring thawed it again. But Jared's absence remained frozen in place. By the end of the year 2000, the trail had become less of a destination and more of a memorial. Flowers were left on fallen logs, small shoes placed under trees. Hikers who passed through walked quietly, glancing into the shadows, as if the forest might whisper a clue, but it never did. And then, silence. No new evidence. No eyewitnesses. No breakthroughs. Only the weight of time growing heavier. Jared's disappearance faded from headlines, replaced by other tragedies. But for Alan, the ache never lessened. He kept his son's room untouched. He kept the lodge open, though emptier than before. He lived in a kind of limbo, haunted by two terrible questions. What had happened to Jared? And, was he still out there? For years, the case remained dormant, until one hot afternoon in June 2003, almost 4 years to the day since Jared vanished, two hikers were exploring a steep, rocky slope not far from the original search area. It was a rugged patch of land, far from the trail, the kind of climb few would make unless they were looking for solitude or something hidden. They were roughly 500 feet above the main trail when they noticed something odd beneath a cluster of moss-covered rocks. A tiny shoe, partially buried, still white and clean as if it had just been dropped. Then a pair of blue sweatpants, turned inside out, and a child's fleece pullover, nearly pristine. There was no blood, no rips, no claw marks, no dirt stains. And most haunting of all, the clothing seemed barely aged, as though it had been left there only days before. Search teams returned immediately. It didn't take long for them to find more. Near the clothing, buried in a shallow, leaf-covered spot, were bone fragments, tiny, brittle, and unmistakably human. A molar, a portion of a skull, a partial femur. DNA confirmed what everyone feared. It was Jared. But with the answer came new, horrifying questions. Why were his clothes clean? Why were his pants inside out? Why was there no sign of predation? And how had he gotten so far uphill? Authorities again suggested a mountain lion, though privately many doubted it. Mountain lions typically bite through the neck, drag prey, and tear through clothing during a kill. None of that was evident. No one could explain the near-pristine condition of the clothing, especially not after 4 years in the Colorado wild. Experts examined the shoes. They looked almost new, the soles barely worn. No evidence of prolonged exposure to harsh terrain. It didn't make sense. Could Jared have been alive, hidden somewhere all this time? Had someone taken him? The theory gained traction, especially among those closest to the case. Some believed that the body and clothes had been moved, placed there deliberately, to throw off investigators, a delayed deposit. Others felt it was nature's cruel trick, a child lost, clothes preserved by shade, snow, and isolation. But Alan never bought that, not for a moment. He believed someone had taken his boy, someone had held him, maybe for days, maybe longer, and then let him die, or worse. He publicly questioned how the adults in the group could have let a 3-year-old wander ahead. He questioned the speed of the initial response, and he questioned the explanations offered by investigators. None of it felt right. And even with the discovery of remains, closure was impossible. There was no cause of death, no forensic evidence pointing to a predator, no suspects, only a few bones and a silence that screamed. Years later, hikers still pause on the Big South Trail, staring into the trees. Parents clutch their children's hands a little tighter, and those who know the story never quite walk the same way again. Because Jared Atadero didn't just disappear. He was erased. And what remained behind was not a body or an answer, only a question, and a trail that still doesn't speak. There's a reason so many people never forget the name Jared Atadero. And it's not just because he went missing, it's because everything that happened afterward only made the story stranger. The day Jared's remains were discovered should have been a turning point. For 4 years, the case had felt like an open wound with no explanation, no peace. Now, with his DNA confirmed, there was finally something solid. But instead of providing answers, the forest gave back pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit. The first problem was the location. The clothing and remains were found in a steep, rocky area nearly half a mile off the main trail, and almost 500 vertical feet higher. This wasn't just difficult terrain, it was unforgiving. Adult hikers had to scramble, gripping trees and using both hands to pull themselves up the slope. Even experienced outdoorsmen admitted they wouldn't have taken that route. How could a 3-year-old child have made it there? Alone? More than one searcher? More than one ranger? More than one reporter whispered the same thought. He couldn't have. Not without help. Not without someone carrying him. Not without someone placing him there, days, months, or even years after he disappeared. The second problem was the condition of his clothes. Investigators and volunteers who were there described it as haunting. His fleece jacket, bright red and unsoiled, looked like it had just come off a store shelf. The Tarzan sneakers, still snug with their Velcro fastened, showed barely any wear. Even his sweatpants, found inside out, had no signs of damage from animals, weather, or time. For a child believed to have died in the wild 4 years earlier, the absence of blood, claw marks, or decomposition felt impossible. One of the search leaders said plainly, "This doesn't look like clothing left in the woods. It looks like clothing put here recently." But perhaps most disturbing of all was how it all pointed in different directions, as if the story of Jared's disappearance had been scrubbed clean of context. Clothes preserved, but no body. Remains scattered, but no predator signs. Pants inside out, but no struggle. Up the slope, but no prints, no dragging marks, no path. The case had officially moved from tragedy into mystery. Authorities issued a cautious conclusion, likely a mountain lion. That's what they'd always said, even back in 1999. It was the cleanest theory. It gave the public something to believe. But behind closed doors, not everyone bought it. Experts who had dealt with dozens of mountain lion cases raised flags. Lions kill by ambush. They attack from behind, bite the neck, and drag the prey. There are always signs, blood trails, fur, shredded fabric. There is trauma to the bones. There are distinct claw and tooth patterns. Jared's fleece jacket had none of those. Neither did his pants or shoes. Even more unsettling, his remains were not in one place. The skull fragment was yards away from the molar, the femur, even further still. Mountain lions don't scatter bones like that. They drag and cache their kills. They don't clean them. They don't rearrange them. Someone else might, though. When investigators began trying to recreate the scene, many found themselves in disbelief. If a predator had attacked Jared near the trail, why were there no signs of a chase? No sounds reported by hikers? No disruption to the forest floor? If he had wandered off on his own, how did he reach that elevation? And why remove his pants? If his body had been there the whole time, how did multiple searches, some involving hundreds of people and even aerial scans, miss it. And if the items were left later, who left them? The questions weren't just piling up. They were fracturing trust. Alan Atadero, who had been quiet in the media for months, finally spoke out. And he was furious. He didn't believe the official story. He didn't believe a mountain lion killed his son. And most of all, he didn't believe the group of adults who had taken Jared hiking that day were blameless. He had asked them to watch his son. He had trusted them. And now, they were offering excuses. They couldn't remember exactly when he ran ahead, couldn't agree on the order of events, couldn't even say when they realized he was missing. One detail stuck out like a wound. Jared had asked the fisherman about bears. That meant he was alone for a long enough stretch to have a conversation with strangers. That meant the group had fallen far behind, or never caught up. Alan's rage wasn't irrational. He was a father. And he knew what so many others quietly feared. Someone let his boy disappear. Whether through neglect or something darker, someone had failed him. Some people began to whisper what few dared say out loud. What if Jared had been taken? Not by an animal, by a person. The idea wasn't far-fetched. In the late 90s, child abductions were tragically common. The lack of Amber Alerts, the remote nature of the trail, and the disorganized early response made it a prime environment for someone to act and vanish without being seen. And if someone had taken Jared, then the items found in 2003 might not have been left by nature at all. They might have been returned, a message, a misdirection, a way to bring closure without telling the truth. It's a theory that gained traction among amateur investigators and Reddit sleuths who dissected every known photo, ranger report, and news interview. Some even claimed there were inconsistencies in the way the evidence was logged. Others said the timing of the clothing discovery, just after a wave of renewed media attention, was suspicious. But no proof ever surfaced. There was no suspect, no motive, no confession, just bones, just silence. Alan continued his fight. He turned his grief into advocacy, pushing for wilderness safety laws and outdoor education. He campaigned for the Amber Alert system in Colorado and helped influence its passage in 2002. But behind all of it, his pain never dulled. He would return to the trailhead each year, standing near the faded signs and worn benches, calling Jared's name one more time. Not because he expected an answer, but because no one else was calling. The case remains open, but cold. The FBI no longer investigates it. Local law enforcement considers it resolved enough. Wildlife officials still lean on the mountain lion theory despite the gaps, and most of the public has moved on. But the forest hasn't. It still remembers. Hikers still report feeling watched on the Big South Trail. Some say they hear footsteps when no one is there. Some say they find child-sized footprints veering off into places no one should walk. Some say it's just the imagination, just the weight of a story that never found its ending. But there's one thing everyone agrees on. The trail feels different now. Not just haunted, hollow, like something was taken from it and never given back. Jared's story is more than just a tragedy. It's a question buried in pine needles and mountain fog. A warning wrapped in silence. A case that never gave up its answer, because maybe the answer was too dark to say out loud. Even now, decades later, his father waits. And somewhere in that forest, the trees still hold their breath. Some stories end in heartbreak. Others end in horror. But Jared's story, it never really ended at all. It simply drifted into the kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind of silence that consumes. In the years following the discovery of Jared's remains, nothing new surfaced. No arrests, no confessions, no official update. The case remained suspended in a purgatory of speculation and grief. Alan kept returning to that trail every year, not out of hope but out of duty. As if leaving flowers and whispering his son's name into the trees could somehow make sense of what never would. He became known in the small mountain communities of Colorado as the man whose son was taken by the woods. Not lost, not killed, but taken. And that word mattered, because it meant something had acted, something had chosen, something had reached out and stolen a child without leaving so much as a scream behind. People started asking harder questions, like why no one heard anything that day, why the hikers in Jared's group didn't notice his absence for so long, why the search teams, trained and relentless, never found his clothing until 4 years later, just 500 feet away from the trail, and why the clothes looked almost untouched, like they had been preserved or protected. The mystery refused to settle. It didn't decay like most cold cases. It burned quietly, like a flame just out of reach, still alive, still dangerous. It pulled in investigators, journalists, amateur sleuths, and parents alike. One theory began to take shape, slow and insidious. What if Jared had never been in danger from an animal? What if he had been watched? There was something chilling about that possibility, the idea that someone might have been lurking in the trees that day, watching the group, noticing the smallest boy, the one who kept running ahead, the one with the bright red jacket and fearless legs. Maybe it was someone who knew the trail, someone who waited for the exact moment when Jared was out of sight, just long enough for no one to notice. Someone who knew how to move fast and quiet in terrain most people struggled to even walk through. The thought gnawed at the edges of every conversation around the case, and it raised the most horrifying possibility of all. What if he had been alive after that first day? The remains found in 2003 didn't show a clear cause of death. There was no trauma to the bones, no forensic evidence to suggest when or how he had died. That left a terrible window of time wide open. Could Jared have been held somewhere? Hidden? Abused? These weren't just questions in a vacuum. They were real possibilities with real pain attached. Because if someone had taken Jared and kept him alive even for a short while, then his death was not just tragic, it was evil. Alan couldn't shake that feeling. He had heard the same theories, read the same reports, walked the same trail dozens of times. And still, every year, he asked the same thing out loud. Where were you? He said it to the trees, the rocks, the wind, anything that might answer. The worst part was that no one could say for sure what happened. The facts were slippery, incomplete. Everything about the case had the texture of a bad dream. Vague impressions, disconnected scenes, a sense of dread without clear cause. Even those closest to the search began to doubt their memories. Some searchers swore they'd combed the very spot where Jared's remains were later found. Not once, but multiple times. One man, a seasoned tracker, said with quiet certainty, "If that clothing had been there during the initial search, we would have seen it." But that only deepened the suspicion. If the items hadn't been there then, who put them there later and why? That question hung like a fog over the trailhead. Some believed the original search had failed, plain and simple. That human error, fatigue, and difficult terrain had simply caused the team to overlook the area. Others believed the clothing had been buried under snow, or fallen behind rocks, or hidden in a way that made it invisible from certain angles. But there were too many variables, too many unknowns, and the most compelling detail remained the pristine condition of the clothes. How could fleece survive 4 Colorado winters and remain unfaded, unstained, unripped? How could Velcro straps stay fastened? Even wildlife biologists were puzzled. Scavengers in the area, bears, coyotes, bobcats, wouldn't have left clothing so untouched. Even if a mountain lion had made the kill, the fleece should have shown puncture marks or bloodstains. The shoes should have been dragged, torn, muddied. But they weren't. They looked placed. Some even said they looked folded. The implications of that weren't just eerie. They were devastating. Because it suggested human hands, deliberate action, a staged scene. It wasn't just the physical evidence that pointed to something darker. It was the feeling. The collective gut instinct of dozens of people who'd walked that trail, read those reports, seen those clothes up close. They all felt it. Something about this case wasn't natural. It was designed, and the deeper people dug, the less they found. There were no other missing persons in the area from that time. No reports of suspicious hikers, no strange vehicles, nothing to follow, nothing to hold on to. It was like the trail had swallowed him whole and then changed its mind. Alan began compiling a personal case file. Interviews, search maps, terrain models, clothing analyses. He marked patterns, compared animal attacks, consulted forensic anthropologists. He reached out to other parents of missing children. He wanted to find common threads, something to explain the unexplainable. But every thread led to the same place, a dead end. Eventually, even the internet took hold of the mystery. Forums dedicated to unsolved disappearances began to dissect the case. Amateur sleuths pointed to the odd timing of the discovery. Some noted the similar cases of children going missing in national parks, many of them under equally strange circumstances. Patterns began to emerge. Children vanishing in daylight. No signs of struggle. Strange elevations. Delayed recoveries. Theories ranged from the rational to the unthinkable. Serial predators. Cover-ups. Even the paranormal. The Atadero case became something bigger than itself, a symbol of everything that can go wrong in the wilderness. A reminder that even in modern America, a child can still vanish without a trace, and that sometimes nature isn't the scariest thing in the woods. But through all of it, one voice remained clear. Alan's. He refused to let Jared become just another story, just another case. He spoke at schools, held events, raised awareness for wilderness safety and missing children. He pushed for GPS wristbands for hikers. He created a website to share updates, and he never stopped searching, not for evidence, but for peace. Even now, decades later, he visits that spot. He sits where the clothing was found. He closes his eyes. And he listens. Not because he expects an answer, but because it's the only thing left to do. Because the silence doesn't scare him anymore. It's the not knowing that still keeps him up at night. Even after all these years, Jared Atadero's name still lingers in Colorado's high country, like the ghost of a breath in cold mountain air. There's something about his story that won't let go. Maybe it's the age. 3 years old, too young to read a warning sign, too trusting to sense danger. Maybe it's the beauty of the place where it happened. The Big South Trail, so serene it seems impossible that such horror could take root there. Or maybe it's because no matter how many times the story is told, it never settles. It never clicks into place like a tragedy should. It remains fractured, disturbed, alive. Alan Atadero doesn't visit the trail as often anymore. He still loves the mountains, still feels closest to his son out there. But something changed in him the day he found out the forest hadn't been silent. It had been holding secrets. The world kept turning after Jared disappeared. People moved on, moved away, forgot. But for Alan, time didn't flow the same. It circled, looped. Each year brought back the same questions, the same impossible images. His boy running ahead on the trail, that red fleece bouncing like a signal flare. Then nothing. And later, years later, a jacket and tiny shoes, sitting in a place no child could reach. Sometimes grief doesn't look like tears or silence. Sometimes it looks like obsession. Alan kept files, letters, photographs. He could recite the timeline by the minute. He knew the exact distance from the trail to the spot where the clothes were found. He knew the model of the helicopter that first flew overhead. He could even tell you the brands of boots worn by each member of the search team. Because when everything is taken from you, you hold on to what's left. Details. Fragments. The way the light looked at 3:00 p.m. The sound of gravel under searchers' boots. The first time a ranger said, "We just don't know." You hold on, because the alternative is letting go of the last pieces of your child. And for Alan, that wasn't an option. The discovery in 2003 didn't bring peace. It brought noise. A rush of media, reporters, theorists. They wanted answers. He had none, only more questions. Why were the clothes unmarked by time or weather? Why had no one found them before? Why had a molar been so far from the femur? Why were the sweatpants inside out? But most haunting of all, why had he been alone? No adult in the hiking group had taken full responsibility. They said he was always darting ahead, always moving too fast, that they tried to keep up, that no one expected him to go far. But for a child that young, even 10 feet ahead is too far. And there was something else, something that twisted in Alan's gut every time he thought about it. The group split up that day. Half the hikers took a break near the river, others moved on. The children were allowed to wander between them. No clear leader, no one at the front, no one truly watching. It wasn't just negligence. It was disorganization disguised as innocence. But negligence doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain how Jared ended up hundreds of feet above the trail. It doesn't explain the untouched clothes, the perfect shoes. It doesn't explain the way time seemed to pause around those items, preserving them unnaturally, as if the mountain itself was involved. Some people began talking about patterns, other missing children, other strange disappearances in national parks. Theories surfaced, cryptic, sometimes conspiratorial, but always anchored in one truth. Too many kids vanish, and too few answers come back. David Paulides, a former law enforcement officer turned investigator, created the Missing 411 series, cataloging hundreds of unsolved wilderness disappearances. Jared's case was among them. Paulides noticed the same thing Alan did, details that defied explanation. Victims found uphill, clothes removed, turned inside out, footwear pristine, no trauma to bones, no blood, no tracks, always silence, and always the feeling that someone, or something, was erasing the end of the story. It's easy to dismiss such ideas, easy to say it's grief chasing shadows, but ask anyone who was on that trail. Ask the searchers, the rangers, the volunteers. Even they'll tell you, this case doesn't feel right. Because the woods don't just lose children, not like this. There are only a few things that can still be said with certainty. Jared Atadero went into the forest alive. He vanished without a sound. And 4 years later, the forest gave back parts of him. But not the story. And it's that absence that screams the loudest. The trailhead today looks different. Signs warn hikers to stay together, to keep children close. Some carry whistles now, GPS trackers, radios. But no device can undo what happened. No map shows the place where the past cracked open. Some hikers stop near the area where the fleece and shoes were found. They leave flowers, stuffed animals, letters. Some of those letters aren't from strangers, but from other parents. Parents who lost their own children to the wild, or worse. Parents who know what it means to never sleep the same way again. Sometimes, when the wind shifts, the trees seem to move just enough to remind you that they were there too. They saw what happened, but they will never tell. Even when hikers swear they hear footsteps behind them, light, fast, playful, they turn, and there's no one. No imprint, no sound. Only the rustle of pine needles and the weight of what might have been. Alan once said that what hurts the most isn't knowing Jared is gone. It's not knowing how, or why, or whether he was scared, whether he cried, whether someone held his hand before they let it go forever. He said that's the part you can never heal from, the not knowing. He wrote a letter once, years after the remains were found. He never published it, but it was shared among friends, passed quietly through grieving parents and support groups. In it, he wrote, "If you know what happened to my son, tell me. Even if it's ugly, even if it's something I'll never recover from. Because I live with the pictures already, the ones in my mind, and they are worse than anything you could say out loud." That letter has become a kind of sacred artifact for some, a reminder that real horror isn't always a monster or a crime scene. It's the vacuum left behind. The silence, the everyday normalcy that tries to keep going after everything inside you has stopped. The Jared Atadero case remains officially unresolved. No suspect. No definitive cause of death. No clear timeline. Just a boy, a trail, and a forest that watched it all. And every year, when the snow melts and the creeks start running again, The Big South Trail welcomes new hikers. Some know the story, most don't. They see the signs, the warnings, and assume this is just another place, another hike. But those who walk quietly, those who stop and listen, they feel it. That presence, that pause, that echo in the trees. And if you ask the right person at the right time of year, they'll tell you, this trail remembers. Some stories fade with time, but others refuse to be forgotten. Jared Atadero wasn't just a little boy lost in the woods. He was a son, a brother, a spark of life full of wonder and laughter. And in a single moment, that spark was swallowed by silence, leaving behind questions no one could answer. We may never know what truly happened in the mountains that day, whether it was an accident, an animal, or something far more unsettling. What we do know is this: the forest holds its secrets, and sometimes it never gives them back. But silence doesn't mean forgotten. Every time his name is spoken, every time his story is told, Jared is remembered, not as a case number, not as a mystery, but as a child who mattered. Jared's father, Alan, later poured his heartbreak into a book titled Missing: When the Sun Sets Before the Father. It's not just a chronicle of events. It's a raw, deeply personal letter to his son and to the world about what it means to carry unanswered grief. Through its pages, Alan gives voice to the pain most parents fear they'll never have to know, the pain of searching for a child who never comes home. If this story moved you, if it left you thinking, wondering, or even aching, then let it do what stories like this are meant to do. Speak louder, ask questions, and never let the memory of the lost fade into the noise of the everyday. Thank you for watching. If you believe stories like Jared's need to be heard, like, subscribe, and share this video. Because the more we tell these stories, the harder it becomes for the world to look away. And as always, stay curious, stay aware, and never stop listening, even to the silence.